Okay, today I'm going to talk about something in writing that can make or break a story. And it's a very simple concept. The author has to be willing to admit when the characters are wrong. I know this might sound almost too simple of an idea here, but to me, this is something I think some people get, you know, they mess it up because with young writing for middle school students and young adult, it and probably even for more adult writing as well. It's very easy, I think, for some individuals to want to make their characters almost infallible. Like their decisions are always in the right. Nobody should ever challenge them. And, you know, I think people have talked about this in terms of comics. I've heard individuals complain whenever they want to write about political divides and they almost like make a caricature of the opposing side because they don't really understand it, which I think we can all agree that's pretty bad writing. You know, you shouldn't probably dive into a political discussion where you only want to talk about your perspective and then just mock everybody else and then try and act like, look how nuanced I am. It's like, you're not being nuanced, you're not being deep, you're just punching the other side and trying to make your side look better than they might actually be, you know? But with writing, maybe one reason why people don't want to always make their characters incorrect and they want to write them as being in the right is maybe they're afraid that that's going to make their characters unlikable. And I guess that it can be a legitimate fear if, you know, the writing is lackluster, which I would say the the way to fix that problem is just always make your character likable at the end of the day, or at least make sure the audience understands their reasons for why they've done what they've done. Make sure they understand their make sure the audience understands every little decision they make, their motivations, all that. Because for me, nothing is more unlikable than a character who I can clearly see is making a wrong decision or is clearly not doing something good, and the author wants me to root for them. You know, I think of rom-coms where the romance is, you know, one person is in a relationship already and the main character is trying to basically win over the person who's already in a relationship. That's always that always makes me want to just push away from that story and go, I don't want to watch anything more out of this. Because why do I want to watch somebody who is trying their hardest to break up a relationship? Someone who's trying to be a homewrecker and they are not apologetic about it, which oftentimes those romance stories will bend over backwards to make it where, oh well, that relationship wasn't right for them, or their partner is abusive or horrible in some way, even though when you originally start the story that's not really there. At least in my experience, there was some dumb like Hallmark Christmas movie I had to watch once where guy shows up and just home wrecks this other relationship because he wants to marry the girl, and she is so distraught and everything, and the other characters in the story are acting like this is a good thing, even though it's like, this is horrible, y'all are manipulating her, making her feel horrible, and I'm supposed to root for y'all. Ugh. That's probably the thing that, yeah, to delve deeper into this topic, everyone has their own little moral compass. Everybody knows that. And it's a what you think is right or wrong comes from, you know, what country you're living in, you know, what religion you follow or lack thereof, what culture you have, how your parents raised you, the life experiences that you've had. All those are going to factor into, you know, what you think is right and wrong. Excuse me. However, there are things that a lot of us can kind of agree on as being a good or bad thing for the most part. And it bothers me whenever I see a character doing things that are clearly wrong or they just have a horrible attitude, or they're, and treating people horrible around them, and the author only seems to be trying to justify all those decisions. They're only trying to justify the bad things, and I can't stand it. There was a story I read several years ago. I couldn't stand it. I didn't even finish the story because I hated it so much. Basic premise is this high school gets teleported into this alien world, and first off, the story portrays all the adults as completely incompetent, and the only one who seems to be competent is this president of the school, the student body president. She's the only one who seems to understand everything, and I mean literally everything. And I don't even know if the story even justified why she knew everything. And the story didn't even really challenge her and her ideals. The story tried to at one point, but then they made the person who was challenging her this horrible, irredeemable person, which then refortifies, oh, this character must be right about everything. She's right all the time because she's just the best. And oh, I can't stand it. I just think to myself, you know what? Authors, your audience always deserves more. They always deserve more than for you to just take somebody who's an awful human being and try and pretend like they're not. It'd be one thing if you're trying to do an unreliable narrator story. But when that happens, to the best of my knowledge, I think the audience can tell when that's the case. And vice versa, they can also tell when the author clearly is, carrying the banner for this character and saying they're the best, while they do, bad things and be just a genuine waste of space and garbage, So, just to be clear, because I've had my stories here, in Mind's Journey, my main character is an amnesiac. So it's very hard for him to be right about everything or anything at all at times because he doesn't know as much as those around him. He kind of has to trust them. And as the books go on, obviously he's going to step more and more into a stronger role when he starts to learn more. But until that point, he kind of has to trust those around him. Meanwhile, my Jasper versus the Well of Souls book, my main character in that one, Jasper, is a bit more, well, he's an older guy who's clearly enchanted. He's clearly one of those guys who's lived for a very long time. And obviously, he knows a lot of things. However, I do write it in a way where he knows a lot, but he's still capable of making mistakes. And he is punished when he makes a mistake. And I think that's a good thing because your characters, part of conflict is they have to be wrong sometimes. They have to make mistakes. I mean, yeah. One of my favorite parts I've ever read in a story is, this is a spoiler for an older manga, Rurouni Kenshin. I love that series. It's one of the first manga I ever read. Obviously, the author, not the best person in the world, but the story the guy wrote back then, really good story. And in that, there's this big arc where he fights a man named Shishio. Shishio basically is the complete opposite of the main character. The main character, Kenshin, believes that the weak and innocent need to be protected. Meanwhile, Shishio thinks basically the strongest survive. Everyone else dies. And Kenshin has to battle Shishio. They have to fight because if Shishio's allowed to continue doing what he wants, he's going to destroy everything and everyone. Everything Kenshin wants to protect will die, basically. His ideals will be completely, stomped on in the dirt. So he has to fight. And when Kenshin is victorious, there's this wonderful scene where basically there's this question of whether or not the main characters, Kenshin in particular, fought for the right side. Because while Shishio was horrible, he was basically rebelling against the Japanese government at that time in history, because this was the Meiji period. And despite Kenshin, and there goes the cat, trying to make sure he didn't go into the video, but despite Kenshin, sorry, my mind's blanking here for a second. Despite Kenshin winning, and despite him saving the government and keeping society stable, there's clearly some really dark things that are going on, some really messed up things that are going on in that government. And there's this moment of, did we do the right thing? Yes or no? Which, of course, the answer to it is, this government stinks. It could be better, but you know what? It's better than, everyone dying, isn't it? Not great, but still better than the alternative. But it does, at the same time, that whole point leaves a kind of a sour taste in their mouth when it comes to the victory. And I like that. I like when a story's willing to be a little more nuanced and say, you know what? Our main characters, even if they're good people, they don't always make the right decisions. And I feel like that's deeper storytelling. And as authors, we should try and do that. It's not always easy. Sometimes it's uncomfortable, but it's worth it in the end. All right. Thanks for listening to me ramble. You have a good day. Bye.